So basically, Elon and many of his henchmen have basically taken control of many uh, departments within the government. And one of the things they've taken control of is this uh, Department of Treasury's like proprietary software they use to like disperse funds,
Right.
I guess is how I would describe it. And uh, so basically, what he's doing is he's kind of like re- routing Congress in terms of like he can stop payments on a dime, like that they've already appropriated, and he can basically be like, nope, I don't want to pay that, therefore we won't. Uh, and Trump doesn't seem to be, from what I can tell, willing to uh, really limit them all that much. I haven't really seen any pushback. And one of the things that uh, Elon has railed against was this USAID, which is
Right.
the United States Agency for International Development,
Hmm.
or something. And basically, they handle a whole host of issues. I mean, like, there's things like they give like AIDS medicine to people in Uganda. They try to, I mean, there are like war torn areas, in like Sudan that they help out with. Uh, Places like Cambodia, I think they're doing like disease treatment, a whole host of like humanitarian
Right.
objectives. And basically, it's, you think of like the carrot and the stick. Well, this is the carrot, I guess. It's like if you're friendly to the US, well, you can get all these nice little freebies, and relatively, it doesn't actually cost us way too much to fund these programs. So it is a good tool of, I guess, soft power, you would call it. Uh, and I guess I'm ambivalent, or I have mixed feelings about this, because on one hand, I see the value in international aid, and giving freebies and stuff to poor and developing nations so that we can apply pressure on them to do good theoretically in the future, or to align with our interests. But on the other hand, I do sympathize with, I guess, Doge's overall goal of reducing the deficit, so our revenue, the gap between our revenues minus our expenditures, our expenditures are much higher than our revenues. So we've had to, I think, issue debt in the realm of like 2 trillion per year, roughly. I mean, now it might even be more.
Sure.
Uh, so on one hand, it's like, well, these programs are valuable, and it seems almost cruel in a way to roll these back. I mean, you got to think, there's going to be some child who was like born with AIDS who will likely die, who will die if we roll these back.
Correct.
On the other hand, it's like, well, we do have prima facie, obligations, so, certain things are in some ways more important. And being able to actually pay our debts, which is something that if our spending compared to the money we take in, if these deficits continue, then somewhere in the future, I don't know when, but there could be a debt default, and then global poverty will skyrocket because if the American, if we default on our payments, the whole financial system crashes. So I I'll sum it up with this: I'm sympathetic to the cause, but it is going of like limiting expenditures, but it's going to be really painful in some ways, and it's a shame that uh, basically a lot of people are going to die in the process. But
Right.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I would just to comment back on some of the stuff you said. I understand that the deficit is of concern to many Americans, particularly those on the right who elected Trump, at least partly to hone in on this deficit, right? At least, that's what they state, right?
Oh yeah, yep.
Um, the problem I have is that the avenue in which they are, or the mechanism in which they are going after the deficit is borderline. It's definitely unconstitutional. It might be illegal. Um, and I've heard several hit pieces on this. You know, the fact that you can just walk into Treasury as basically just a friend of the president. Like Elon Musk doesn't hold any appointed position by Congress. He, wasn't sworn in anywhere, like I don't even know. Have they even created Doge yet? I'm not even sure. But the fact that he can just walk in there and now he has sensitive data, secured data on virtually every American. He has access to Social Security, government contractors, and people who are his competitors. By the way, Medicare benefits. You know, it, if you were, and I don't mean you specifically, if the right was genuine about solving this issue, because let's be real here, let's call a spade a spade. Elon's role here is only going to marginally cut the deficit. His team of five is not going to cut this thing down $1 trillion, right? Yeah. And like if you are somebody who's like taking this seriously, like you said, like, there is a way to actually attack this. And unfortunately, it's not the way. Like there is no constitutional power for the executive branch to just take down whatever payment it doesn't want. So part of this comes into Trump is a believer in what's called unitary executive theory, which basically means that the president is more like a king and less like a third member of a co-equal branch of government, right? And that's how they're treating this presidency. Is what it looks like is that it's like when Congress. Here's how it's supposed to work in theory, right? And this is more for our listeners. Congress passes a law that says we're going to give $50 billion to say Ukraine, right? Then it goes to the president after it passes both houses. The president signs it, and the Supreme Court says, yep, nothing unconstitutional about that. And then it goes to Treasury to actually get sent to Ukraine. Does that make sense? And the problem is this money that Musk is going after has already passed every single one of those steps, which is what makes it borderline illegal. Now, I say it borderline illegal because Trump is the head of the executive. He's not going to charge Elon Musk, right? Like, there's not a prayer of that happening. But there is no mechanism for the president to just be like, actually, I'm not going to do that, even though it's already been signed by a president and agreed to by a Supreme Court. I'm not going to honor that. And that is unconstitutional, like for a fact. So, in other words, Elon Musk and Trump are treating this as, the budget that Congress passes is more like it's more like a suggestion than a binding piece of law. Which that would, if they take this to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court sides with Trump and Elon, that's going to change the fundamental way our government works. Because you've probably heard of the power of the purse. Well, Congress, throughout all of our history, has had the power of the purse. In other words, they choose where money goes. The only role the executive branch has is to have Treasury send the funding there because Congress is just there to pass laws. The executive is supposed to execute the laws that Congress passes. And this is not controversial. This is not some Marxist, Leninist, interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. This is universal. Well, that's what Elon said. Elon said that this idea that I don't have the power to do this is Marxist, and it doesn't make any sense. And like I said, I am sympathetic to people like yourself, and I know many people who are like, we've got to get this deficit under control because if we default, then that the whole world's gonna fucking collapse for at least a decade or a half a decade, whatever it is. My problem is that like their way of going through that is not going to get the job done, even to your own goals. So, like, you want a reduced deficit. This is just going to marginally. So, like, for example, U.S. aid, right? USAID, right? It only accounts for
Oh
like
yes.
less than it's like 0.5% of the budget. It's not gonna. I mean, what the fuck is that gonna do, Darren? I mean, fuck, that's less than the tariffs. Um, it's
Well,
the
I will.
way. What's up?
Oh my. Well, I will certainly concede that. The USAID, cutting it alone will certainly not solve the problem. And uh, while I will say, I guess to be charitable, you do have to start somewhere. I think if you're not willing to touch entitlements
Darren, we're not even
primarily,
sure that this is
and
legal.
then the military.
We're not even sure that this is
Oh well,
legal.
see,
You
my
know?
thing is, I know it. I mean, I understand. It's pretty. I mean, I don't. It's unconstitutional. It to me, it seems unconstitutional, but I don't really care. Like,
I knew that was going to. And listen, hey, listen, you're 100% not alone in that. Like there are, first of all, these people don't even know what the Constitution is who voted for Trump. Like the idea that they're going to care that this is unconstitutional or legal, they're just going to care that Trump reduced the deficit. You know, like that's
yeah.
they're going to be like, graph go down, good. Like that's all they're going to know.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. And here's the thing, like, and this kind of just plays into my, you know, beliefs in general. I'm more in favor of authoritarian rule, and this seems basically like a step in in that direction. Like you were saying, if this goes to the Supreme Court and they somehow side with Trump, even though I don't really, I, 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 I don't think they would. The Supreme Court does seem to still have some of its they do seem to still follow the Constitution, and I do believe it is probably unconstitutional. But if it did go to the court and they sided with him, I would think that would be a step in the right direction because like going back to like entitlements, no elected official will ever cut those, and nobody will ever get elected running on cutting that. The only way somebody could get elected and do it is if they tricked the voters,
Right.
basically. Which, I'm not totally opposed to doing, but I mean, uh, it'll be hard to vote for someone who will cut entitlements if you don't know they're actually going to do it. So I think moving to more like autocratic, authoritarian rule where somebody has a term in office for decades rather than just 4 to 8 years, so they can like really like impose their vision upon the country and they don't have to worry so much about getting ousted or losing political capital or worrying about the midterms. So, worrying, oh, am I going to lose seats in Congress? Because sometimes unpopular things need to happen for the greater good, and basically, in a democracy where everyone's worried about the next 2 years, presidential election, then midterms, then presidential election again, you're never going to be able to solve these really fundamental problems that are going to like kind of shape generations by how you choose to fix them. And this is kind of a rabbit hole because this is kind of off the topic of Elon, but
No, no, no. I don't think it is
even
actually. I don't think it is.
okay, well, like even if you lift the cap on the Social Security tax, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like past like 250K, I want to say. It's been a while since I've been read up on these particular facts, but I believe it's like past 250K. Your the degree to which you're taxed for Social Security does not go up. Well, even if they lifted that cap, that will kick the can down the road for a few decades, but ultimately this problem will appear again, especially since people are not reproducing. And, you know, that could change. People might start reproducing again,
It
but I
it
don't see it happening.
no, no,
So,
no, no. You're at no. You don't understand these social security tables. That's a point that I keep hearing. Like the fact that social security is at all related to birth rates is just not true. The only way it can even be closely related to birth rates is if there is a cap. Because if there's no cap, then it just has to do with the total wealth of the country. Which, unless you're expecting the total wealth of the country to eventually go down or like flatline, then we have something to worry about. But if you lift the cap, right,
mhm.
then it doesn't matter if our birth rate is declining like it is, which I concede. Then it wouldn't matter as long as the wealth goes up, the total wealth of the nation goes up because they'll just be taxed on that wealth. You know, um, does that make sense? Like,
Well, yeah, I do see your point there. I do see your point there, but
and I think
I
there's a lot of good evidence that if you lift it, just simply removing the cap would like push this can down the road, as you like to say, for like almost 150 years. Like your kids' grandkids won't have to worry about Social Security, you know? Like, um,
I do hope that is the case. I do hope that is the case, and uh, I would certainly be thrilled if it is. But and this goes in, and let's say for sake of argument, then that is the case. I think the only way to enact that reform, you could go the democratic way. You could get that in a democratic way, but you would have to limit the power of these very rich individuals to influence politics.
sure. Um, and I concede to you that there is like some structural disadvantages to a democracy built like ours is, where you're constantly worried about the next 2 years. And listen, like there's representatives everywhere that are like, I would vote yes for this because I believe this, but my election is in 6 months and there's no way. Like I'll catch hell back home if I did. That there's probably at this point thousands of clips of politicians saying that. Where it's like, yeah, like I would have done that. But I guess here's and I'm gonna go down a bit of a rabbit hole here. But you just bear with me. Um, my problem is that a guy like a singular person like an Elon Musk or even a Mark Zuckerberg or a George or a yeah, is it George Soros, right? Um, any one of those guys having the power that they do with a single person being held unaccountable is a problem. And it's a fucking problem. And let me just give you an example. This will be a great way to kind of visualize what happened. So around the mid 2000s, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They decided they wanted to get into like public education, specifically high school education and elementary school and middle school education.
Hmm.
So they
Oh
so
yeah, Common
before
Core.
exactly Common Core, um, they bumped potentially billions of dollars into this program. They cited they did not consult educators or academics on like how to do this. They tried to basically move towards privatization in terms of like performance standards, standardized testing instead of like conceptual testing, where instead of like teaching things to have like a concept grasp or a critical thinking grasp, they're more like a memorization based thing. And so your lesson plans are taught to the test instead of actually learning it. And the problem is that exactly what you would think happened is test scores kind of flatlined and then decreased because kids aren't actually learning anything. And I don't know if you know what the Rand Corporation is, but it's a libertarian based organization similar to the Heritage Foundation. And they did like a full deep dive into this over like 2 decades, basically. And they came back and they said, big mistake, big fucking mistake. We should have listened to educators. We should have listened to teachers. We should have listened to academics. Like, this is not good. And we don't know how to fix it. That was the conclusion of their study. So we don't know how to fix it now. Um, and I say all that to say this. I'm sure you're like, what the hell does that have to do with Musk? The fact is that Elon Musk, just like Bill and Melinda Gates, they might genuinely think that this is a good thing and they're working to better education and their heart may be in the right place. I might concede that. But the fact is that if you swing and miss with one of these billionaires, there are zero consequences for them. There's no repercussions, there's no nothing. So as warm as his heart may be, it's too fucking dangerous to let them have that level of unaccounted power. You know that it's you can't do it. It can't be done.
Yeah, uh, yeah. I mean, I can't really think of any way in which Bill and Melinda Gates were penalized for that. On the other hand, I mean, take George Bush. I mean, was he ever really held like accountable for like the Iraq War? Uh, so if it's a matter of accountability, I would already say that there's basically no accountability, anyways.
Well,
Uh,
I guess my point, like, even greater, is that, like, if they're, we should not let them have that kind of power to just unilaterally change the fundamental structures of our society. I mean, that just can't happen. It's too fucking dangerous, dude. It's we don't even have a positive benefit. I don't know, you know, outside of the New Deal, right? Like,
oh yeah, well, Musk in particular is, I mean, as sympathetic as I can be to some elements of his agenda, I mean, it's just so obvious that he's really just in this for, personal enrichment, I mean,
true,
I mean, there's no way that he's going to be cutting funding to any like grant, federal grants that are going to go to him, even though you could argue, although I would disagree, but you could argue that, SpaceX is basically a waste of money or is wasting money because I've seen clips where Elon will promise X thing by X date, and basically he should be a little further along, or actually a lot further along than he is by now. I mean, we should. Uh, I mean, from what he's promised in the past, I mean, we should be getting fairly close to reach, having a manned mission to Mars. So
right.
yeah, we're pretty far away from that, unfortunately, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So I will say there is that danger present, and personally, I would. prefer that in the shift towards uh, autocracy that I'm more so in favor of conceptually, just in terms of like governmental efficiency. I would prefer it not be like billionaires that make the push, but rather like actual government officials who like, maybe you have like disagreements with like what their the specifics of their ideology, but ultimately they're not in it just for enrichment. They're in it for the prosperity of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is a unique threat posed by billion by billionaire. I will concede.